Okay, hi sixth graders. This is Mrs. Maley, if you don't have me. And in our last module, we started studying science fiction. Remember, science fiction is made up stories featuring science and technology from the future. It could have aliens, it could have time travel, and even superheroes are considered science fiction. There is a very famous sci-fi show called The Twilight Zone. It is actually on Netflix if you want to watch that. We normally read a script during class, but since we can't do that, I have gathered as many of the sixth grade teachers as I can, and the ones that can't be here wish they could be, and they say hi. Um, so we're going to actually read it to you. This episode is, if you want to watch it, but our version is probably better, it is season 1, episode 22, and it is called um, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. Okay, so I'm going to tell you who everybody is going to be. I am going to be the narrator and stage directions. I'll read the stage directions. Normally, you don't read stage directions. That tells you what the characters are doing, where they're going. Tommy is going to be played by Mrs. Isley. Steve Brand is Mr. Terrazino. Don Martin is Mrs. Pfeiffer. Myra Brand is Mrs. Betker. Woman, without a name, just woman, is Mrs. Ratliff. Voice 1 is Mrs. Lingo. Voice 2 is also Mrs. Betker. Voices 3 and 4 is Mrs. King. Voice 5 is Mrs. Williamson. Pete Van Horn is Mr. Woodruff. Charlie is Mr. Curtis. Sally, who's Tommy's mom, is Mrs. Snyder. Man 1 is Mr. Rigsby. Les Goodman is Miss Smith. Ethel Goodman is Miss Hickman. Figure 1 is Mr. Woodruff. And figure 2 is Mrs. Williamson. And last but not least, man 2 is Mr. Ratliff. Okay, so there are 2 acts and there will be 2 recordings. So we will do act 1 right now. It's called The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street.
You're traveling through another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
Act 1. Fade in on a shot of the sky. The various nebulae and planet bodies stand out in sharp, sparkling relief as the camera begins a slow pan across the heavens. There is a 5th dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone. The camera has begun to pan down until it passes the horizon and on a sign which reads Maple Street. Pan down until we are shooting down at an angle toward the street below. It's a tree-lined, quiet residential American street, very typical of a small town. The houses have front porches on which people sit and swing on gliders, conversing across the house from house to house. Steve Brand polishes his car parked in front of his house. His neighbor, Don Martin, leans against the fender watching him. A good-humored man rides a bicycle and is just in the process of stopping to sell some ice cream to a couple of kids. 2 women gossip on the front lawn. Another man waters his lawn. Maple Street, USA, late summer. A tree-lined little world of front porch gliders, hopscotch, the laughter of children, and the bell of an ice cream vendor. There is a pause and the camera moves over to a shot of the good-humored man and 2 small boys who are standing alongside just buying ice cream. At the sound of the roar and the flash of light, it will be precisely 6:43 p.m. on Maple Street. At this moment, one of the little boys, Tommy, looks up to listen to a sound of a tremendous screeching roar from overhead. A flash of light plays on both their faces, and then it moves down the street past lawns and porches and rooftops and then disappears. Various people leave their porches and stop what they are doing to stare up at the sky. Steve Brand, the man who's been polishing his car, now he stands there transfixed, staring upwards. He looks at Don Martin, his neighbor from across the street.
What was that? A meteor?
That's what it looked like. I didn't hear any crash though, did you?
Nope. I didn't hear anything except a roar.
Steve, what was that?
Guess it was a meteor, honey. Came awful close, didn't it?
Too close for my money, much too close.
The camera pans across the various porches to people who stand there watching and talking in low conversing tones. Maple Street, 6:44 p.m. on a late September evening. Maple Street, in the last calm and reflective moments before the monsters came. The camera slowly pans across the porches again. We see a man screwing a light bulb on a front porch, then getting down off the stool to flick the switch and finding that nothing happens. Another man is working on an electric power mower. He plugs in the plug, flicks on the switch of the power mower, off and on, with nothing happening. Through the window of a front porch, we see a woman pushing her finger back and forth on the dial hook. Her voice is indistinct and distant, but intelligible and repetitive.
Operator, something's wrong on the phone. Operator!
Mrs. Brand comes out on the porch and calls to Steve.
Steve, the power's off. I have the soup on the stove and the stove just stopped working.
Same thing over here. I can't get anybody on the phone either. The phone seems to be dead.
We look down the street as we hear the voices creep up from down below, small, mildly disturbed voices highlighting these kinds of phrases.
Electricity's off.
Phone won't work.
Can't get a thing on the radio. My power motor won't move. Won't work at all.
Radio's gone dead.
Pete Van Horn, a tall, thin man, is seen standing in front of his house.
Hey, I'll just cut through the backyard, see if the power's still on Floral Street. I'll be right back.
He walks past the side of his house and disappears into the backyard, the hammer on Van Horn's hip as he walks. The camera pans down slowly until we're looking at 10 or 11 people standing around the street, and overflowing to the curb and sidewalk in the background is Steve Brand's car.
Doesn't make sense. Why should the power go off all of a sudden in the phone line?
Maybe some sort of an electrical storm or something.
Well, that don't seem likely. Sky's just as blue as anything. Not a cloud, no lightning, no thunder, no nothing. How could it be a storm?
I can't get a thing on the radio, not even the portable.
The people again murmur softly in wonderment and question.
Well, why don't you go downtown and check with the police? They'll probably think we're crazy or something. A little power failure and right away we get all flustered and everything.
It isn't just the power failure, Charlie. If it was, we'd still be able to get a broadcast on the portable.
There's a murmur of reaction to this. Steve looks from face to face and then over to his car.
I'll run downtown. We'll get this all straightened out.
He walks over to the car, gets in it, turns the key. Beyond it, we see the crowd watching him from the other side. Steve starts the engine. It turns over sluggishly and then just stops dead. He tries it again, and this time he can't get it to turn over. Then, very slowly and reflectively, he turns the key back to off, and then slowly gets out of the car. As they stare at Steve, he stands for a moment by the car, then walks toward the group.
I don't understand it. It was working fine before.
Out of gas?
I just had it filled up.
What's it mean?
Well, it's just as if everything had stopped. We better walk downtown.
The two of us can go, Charlie. It couldn't be the meteor. A meteor couldn't do this.
He and Charlie exchange a look, then they start to walk away from the group. We see Tommy, a serious-faced 14-year-old in spectacles who stands a few feet away from the group, halfway between them and the two men who start to walk down the sidewalk.
Mr. Brand, you better not.
Why not?
They don't want you to.
Who doesn't want us to?
Them.
Them.
Hey, who are them?
Whoever was in that thing that came by overhead.
Steve knits his brows for a moment, cocking his head questioningly. His voice is intense.
What?
Whoever was in that thing that came over. I don't think they want us here.
Steve leaves Charlie and walks over to the boy. He kneels down in front of him. He forces his voice to remain gentle. He reaches out and holds the boy.
What do you mean? What are you talking about?
They don't want us to leave. That's why everything keeps getting shut off.
What makes you say that? Whatever gave you that idea?
Now, isn't that the craziest thing you ever heard?
It's always that way in every story I've ever read about a ship landing from outer space.
From outer space yet. Sally, you better get that boy of yours up to bed. He's been reading too many comic books or seeing too many movies or something.
Tommy, come over here and stop that kind of talk.
Go ahead, Tommy. We'll be all right. And you'll see, that wasn't any ship or anything like it. That was just a meteor or something, likely as not.
He turns to the group, now trying to weight his words with an optimism he obviously doesn't feel, but is desperately trying to instill in himself as well as others.
No doubt it did have something to do with all this power failure and the rest of it. Meteors can do some crazy things, like sunspots.
Sure, that's the kind of thing like sunspots. They raise Cain with a radio reception all over the world. And this is when things being so close, why there's no telling that sort of stuff it can do. Go ahead, Charlie. You and Steve go into town and see if that's what's causing all this.
Steve and Charlie again walk away from the group down the sidewalk. The people watch silently. Tommy stares at them, biting his lips and finally calling out again.
Mr. Brand!
The two men stop again. Tommy takes a step toward them.
Mr. Brand, please don't leave here.
Steve and Charlie can be seen beyond them. They stop once again and turn toward the boy. There's a murmur in the crowd, a murmur of irritation and concern as if the boy were bringing up fears that shouldn't be brought up. Words which carried with them a strange kind of validity that came without logic, but nonetheless registered and had meaning and effect. Again, the murmur of reaction from the crowd. Tommy is partly frightened and partly defiant as well.
You might not even be able to get to town. It was that way in the story. Nobody could leave. Nobody except...
Except who?
Except the people they'd sent down ahead of them. They looked just like humans. And it wasn't until the ship landed that...
Oh, Tommy, please, son. Honey, don't talk that way.
That kid shouldn't talk that way. And we shouldn't stand here listening to him. Why, this is the craziest thing I ever heard of. That kid tells us a comic book plot, and we stand here listening.
Steve walks toward the camera, stops by the boy.
Go ahead, Tommy. What kind of story was this? What about the people that they sent out ahead?
That was the way they prepared for things, or the way they prepared things for the landing. They sent 4 people, a mother and a father and 2 kids who looked just like humans, but they weren't.
There's another silence as Steve looks toward the crowd and then toward Tommy. He wears a tight grin.
Well, I guess what we'd better do then is run a check on the neighborhood and see which ones of us are really human.
There's laughter at this, but it's a laughter that comes from a desperate attempt to lighten the atmosphere. It's a release kind of laugh. The people look at one another in the middle of their laughter.
There must be something better to do than stand around here making bum jokes about it. I wonder if Floral Street's got the same deal we got. Where's Pete Van Horn anyway? Didn't he go get back yet?
Suddenly there is the sound of a car's engine starting to turn over. We look across the street toward the driveway of Les Goodman's house. He's at the wheel trying to start the car.
Can you get it started, Les?
No dice.
He walks toward the group. He stops suddenly as behind him, inexplicably and with a noise that inserts itself into the silence, the car engine starts up all by itself. Goodman whirls around to stare toward it. The car idles roughly, smoke coming from the exhaust, the frame shaking gently. Goodman's eyes go wide, and he runs over to his car. The people stare at the car.
He got that car started somehow. He got his car started somehow.
How come his car just up and started like that?
All by itself. He wasn't anywhere near it. It started all by itself.
Don approaches the group, stops a few feet away to look toward Goodman's car, and then back toward the group.
And he never did come out to look at that thing that flew overhead. He wasn't even interested. Why? Why didn't he come out to look with the rest of us?
Yeah, he always was an oddball. Him and his whole family. Real oddball.
What do you say we ask him?
The group suddenly starts towards the house. In this brief fraction of a moment, they take the first step toward performing a metamorphosis that changes people from a group into a mob. They begin to head purposefully across the street toward the house at the end. Steve stands in front of them. For a moment, their fear almost turns their walk into a wild stampede. But Steve's voice, loud, incisive, and commanding, makes them stop.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Let's not be a mob.
The people stop as a group, seem to pause for a moment, and then much more quietly and slowly start to walk across the street. Goodman stands there alone, facing the people.
I just don't understand it. I tried to start it, and I wouldn't start. You saw me. All of you saw me.
And now, just as suddenly as the engine started, it stops, and there's a long silence that is gradually intruded upon by the frightened murmuring of people.
I don't understand. I swear I don't understand. What's happening?
Maybe you better tell us. Nothing's working on this street. Nothing. No lights. No power. No radio. Nothing except one car. Yours.
The people pick this up, and now their murmuring becomes a loud chant filling the air with accusations and demands for action. Two of the men pass on and head toward Goodman, who backs away, backing into his car and now at bay.
Wait a minute now. You keep your distance, all of you. So I've got a car that starts by itself. Well, that's a freak thing, I admit it. But does that make me some kind of criminal or something? I don't know why the car works. It just does.
This stops the crowd momentarily, and now Goodman, still backing away, goes toward his front porch. He goes up the steps and then stops to stand facing the mob. We see Steve as he comes through the crowd.
We're all on a monster kick, Les. Seems that the general impression holds that maybe one family isn't what we think they are. Monsters from outer space or something. Different from us. Bit calmness from the vast beyond. You know anybody that might fit that description around here on Maple Street?
What is this, a gag or something? This a practical joke or something?
We see a close-up of a porch light that suddenly goes out. There's a murmur from the group.
Now, I suppose that's supposed to incriminate me? The light goes on and off? That really doesn't it? I just don't understand this. Look, you all know me. We've lived here 5 years, right in this house. We're no different than any of the rest of you. We're no different at all. Really, this whole thing is it's just weird.
Well, if that's the case, Les Goodman, explain why.
Explain what?
Look, let's forget this.
No, go ahead. Let her talk. What about it? Explain what?
Well, sometimes I go to bed late at night. A couple of times they come out on the porch, and I see Mr. Goodman here in the wee hours of the morning, standing out in the front of his house, looking up at the sky. That's right, looking up at the sky as if he were waiting for something, as if he were looking for something.
There's a murmur of reaction from the crowd again, as Goodman starts toward them. They back away, frightened.
You know, really, this is for laughs. You know what I'm guilty of? I'm guilty of insomnia. Now, what's the penalty for insomnia? Did you hear what I said? I said it was insomnia. I said it was insomnia! You fools! You scared, frightened rabbits, you! You're sick people, do you know that? You're sick people, all of you. You don't even know what you're starting, because let me tell you this thing you're starting. That should frighten you. As God is my witness, you're letting something begin here that's a nightmare.
Okay, that concludes Act 1. You can find Act 2 in your Lesson 3 materials. Okay, so tune in for Lesson 2, or for Act 2.